Good afternoon. Well, firstly, Mr. Justice Kavanaugh in his closing remarks described the campaign of abuse faced by Sara as torture, adding that he did not use that word lightly. He said to a court that Sara was treated as a skivvy in the family home, that no consideration was shown for her age, that she was taken out of school and homeschooled as a means to continue the abuse that she was facing at home. He said that she wore a headscarf to cover her injuries, that her injuries were also hidden with makeup. Speaking to the defendants, he said, "You did not care about Sara enough to save her." And so today has decided to sentence Sara's father, Urfan Sharif, life in prison with a minimum term of 40 years in jail for his daughter's murder. Sara's stepmother, Beinash Batool, was handed life in prison with a minimum term of 33 years in prison for Sara's murder. And her uncle, Faisal Malik, who was acquitted of murder, was handed 16 years for causing or allowing Sara's death. This was met in court by clapping in the public gallery and tears from Sharif and Batool. Now, Sara's mother, Olga Domin, she joined the proceedings today remotely from Poland and said this in a victim impact statement. Addressing the defendant, she said, "You are sadists, although even this word is not enough for you. I would say you are executioners. The only thing I had left to give my daughter was to give her a beautiful Catholic funeral she deserved. She is no longer experiencing violence." Now, this was a trial that lasted around 2 months, and really the defining pivotal moment was when Sharif, who maintained his innocence throughout the trial, largely throughout the trial, pointing the blame at his wife, admitted responsibility on the 7th day of his cross-examination, admitting that he killed Sara, admitting that he beat her with a metal pole and a cricket bat, and that he was responsible for over 25 of her fractures. But ultimately, the jury decided last week that Sharif was not alone in murdering Sara. They decided that Batool, Sara's primary carer, was also responsible and had either encouraged or assisted him in carrying out at least some of the attacks that contributed to her death. The judge there, Justice Kavanaugh, in his closing remarks, described some of the acts as a two-person job. Now that the trial is over, there are some serious questions for the authorities. Who was responsible for putting this little girl in a position which eventually led to her murder, given that the police and social services were aware of the family and of Sara's case? An inquest and safeguarding review, we know, is due to look into this to get some answers in the new year. But for Sara's mum, for her siblings, for her friends, the damage really is already done. But today at least will give the family some closure and a sense of justice for their little girl.
And Saba, as you say, this has raised so many questions, hasn't it? So many questions about failures of the authorities to intervene in this little girl when it was already known that there were concerns about her welfare from before birth from him, but also concerns that the authorities did not act, something the judge alluded to here, previous allegations of domestic violence against Urfan Sharif, which again the authorities discounted 3 times. He was accused by 3 separate women of holding them against their will.
Reflected in the judge's closing remarks, and he also pressed upon the fact that she was homeschooled, adding that there are some concerns around unsupervised homeschooling, that Sara was put in a position where, because she was not in school, that the family were given essentially free rein to abuse her in whatever way they wished. Now, as you mentioned, there is going to be an inquest, a safeguarding review, looking into the weeks, days leading up to Sara's death to get some more answers in terms of who exactly is responsible for what happened to her.
Saba, let's just remind our viewers, if you're just tuning our way, these life sentences handed down to the father and stepmother of Sara Sharif. Here's what Judge Mr Justice Kavanagh said in sentencing whilst delivering his verdict at the Old Bailey.
Sara was 10 years old when she was murdered. You, Urfan Sharif, were her father. You, Beinash Batool, were her stepmother. You, Faisal Malik, were her uncle. Sara's death was the culmination of years of neglect, frequent assaults, and what can only be described as the torture of this small child, mainly, but not entirely, at the hands of you, her father, Urfan Sharif. The degree of cruelty involved is almost inconceivable. This happened in plain sight, in front of the rest of the family, including, for the last 8 months of Sara's life, in front of you, Faisal Malik. The courts at the Old Bailey have been witness to many accounts of awful crimes, but few can have been more terrible than the account of the despicable treatment of this poor child that the jury in this case have had to endure.
And Saba, Mr Justice Kavanagh there, perhaps explaining in the very clearest terms, just at the end there, how horrific this case has been for people like him to listen to, for the jury to listen to, and that reflected in the severity of the sentences that he handed down today, Saba.
Absolutely. He described Sara Sharif's treatment as gruesome, also using the word torture, something he said that he was not doing so lightly. And for that reason, he today handed down the following sentences. Sara's father, Urfan Sharif, he gave life in prison with a minimum term of 40 years in jail for Sara's murder. Sara's stepmother, Beinash Batool, was given life in prison as well, but with a minimum term of 33 years in prison for her murder. And Sara's uncle, Faisal Malik, who is, we know, acquitted of murder, but was handed down a sentence of 16 years for causing or allowing Sara's death.